This is Randy Sullivan, the host of Bourbon Real Talk. I grew up in a small town and went to a small church where everyone looked and thought like me. Over the years, I've gotten to know and love people from all different walks of life. This has made my world bigger and richer. The secret ingredient in forming those relationships was getting to know people's real stories. That helped me to identify with them, have compassion on them, and eventually develop a real connection with them. We live in a disconnected world today, and I want to do everything in my power to build connections between individuals who may not have attempted friendship otherwise. I've observed this happening in the bourbon community on its own because whiskey naturally brings people together. Bourbon Real Talk hopes to combine the world's new passion for bourbon into an opportunity to bring people together. We will share some whiskey knowledge, some good drams, and some real talk. So sit back, pour a drink, and open your hearts and minds. You might just find yourself feeling more connected to the people in the world around you, all fueled by bourbon. Hello, everybody out there in Bourbon Real Talk land. Randy Sullivan here with a very special guest. We have Craig you're from Southern Oklahoma, right?
I'm from Ardmore.
Ardmore.
Yep,
Okay.
Ardmore.
Yeah, you said one of the larger cities,
Yep.
so I guess I didn't put two and two together.
Yep, Ardmore.
So we got Craig here from Southern Oklahoma, and we are going to be drinking Buffalo Trace Antique Collection William Larue Weller today as a kind of special treat. Now, I know the bottle looks empty. Don't get too concerned because pow, look at that. So I've mentioned this before. If you have a rare bottle of whiskey, especially if it's a wheater, you might want to transfer it over to a smaller bottle as the bottle gets empty because the oxygen will start to affect the flavor. And I drink these very slow, as you could imagine. So we're going to check out this William Larue Weller 2018. And you've not had this, right?
I have not had it, no.
Gotcha. And so I met you through Oklahoma Bourbon Connoisseur. So you can see he's repping today. I don't know if you can see that on the glass. Let me get it. Oh, look. There you go. Yeah, you can see it. Oklahoma Bourbon Connoisseurs member here. And so how long have you been into whiskey?
You know, I've been into alcohol for a long time. Whiskey is just over the last several years, 4 or 5 years, is something that I've just kind of gotten into. I've always had the bourbon, has always been my choice. And now I've slowly and surely came up from classic white label Jim Beam all the way up to the $75 and $80 bottles of whatever I get.
Whatever you can get your hands on nowadays.
And I stopped mixing it with Coke and started going to Glencairn glasses, and
there you go.
Bought myself a nice little set of those Libby's bourbon glasses. And I tend to love them.
Nice. All right. Well, this one on the nose, it's smelling a little hot.
Yeah.
The ethanol's coming through a little bit. But definitely a sweeter nose.
I can still smell the oak.
Yeah, there's definitely a sweet oak smokiness that's coming through. Some citrus. So this is a wheat whiskey, or it's a wheated bourbon. Not a wheat whiskey, but a wheated bourbon. And so that wheat sometimes translates as a little bit of a citrus component. Maybe some orange, but I'm getting some floral too. Don't want to be a douchebag with my my nosing notes, but maybe like a lilac or something. But it smells beautiful.
Yeah, it smells wonderful.
Yeah, let's see how it tastes. Yeah. So
that is something else.
Yeah. So on obviously vanilla all day long, mid palate. Some citrus notes, maybe some orange peel, some florally notes. I'm not real good at picking out specific florally notes.
I can get the citrus. I'm not getting as much of the floral.
And then, but on the finish, though, that's where it comes in with like toffee, some caramelized sugar notes, and I'm getting tobacco. like a sweet kind
I can see
of,
that. I'm not getting it so much, but
yeah, like a sweeter pipe tobacco kind of flavor. I used to go into the tobacco shop when I was a kid, and I'd smell all of the things.
Right.
So a little bit of that. Yeah, I like that. I like it. So this is probably
Wonderful.
my number 2 whiskey of all time. My number 1 is George T. Stagg. I would have given you that, but we drank it with Bill and Nell whenever we did the recording for Divine Equine. I'm sure we'll get back to it at some point as my podcast carries on. So I invited you here today because you have spent, from what I understand, your entire working career in the field of law enforcement in various roles.
Some law enforcement capacity, one way or the other.
One way or the other, yeah. And so tell us about how you got your start.
I came from a law enforcement family. I mean, I was a law enforcement son. My father was in law enforcement for as long as I could remember. I never remember him doing anything else.
Gotcha.
And, I went to college. I had ambitions of being something other than law enforcement.
Okay.
As most people
teenage boys.
Yeah. Well, it is most people in law enforcement. They want something different for their children. So my dad always encouraged me, you don't need to be a cop.
Right.
Go find something else to do. So I started doing that. College with a broke Oklahoma kid, Southern Oklahoma, was kind of rough. And I'm like, you know what? This is what I know how to do. And I know I need a job. So they put me to work as a detention officer at the sheriff's office. And I started at the same time my dad was working there and just worked my way up from there. I worked from the detention side of it, got into dispatch. Dispatchers were kind of where I cut my teeth in the actual law enforcement part of it. All I wanted to do with life was to put a badge and gun on and go out and do exactly what my dad did.
Wow.
And got out there and did that and worked it for about 5 years. And in 2005, I got pregnant with my wife and I got pregnant with my son. And I grew up in law enforcement and I knew what it was like when you had the knock on your door and somebody come up and said, hey, your dad has been in a major car accident and we need to take you to the hospital now. I know what it's like for dad to come home and he had a broken nose because he got into a fight with several people and they wore him out.
Yeah.
And I know what it's like for them to get the knock on the door and said, hey, the sheriff sent me here to your house because your dad was in an altercation and he had to shoot and kill a man today. And I'm supposed to stay here with you until your dad's free to where he can come back to the house. And I knew those feelings. I knew what it was like growing up in that. And I did not want my son to grow up like that. So I decided I'm done with the drunks. I'm done with the domestics. This is kind of a bullshit life. So I'm going to go find something else to do where I don't have to wear the gun and the badge every single day. So I transitioned from there over to child support enforcement with the district attorney's office. And it was a very, very political place. Wasn't my style. Wasn't something that I really wanted to do every day. The only job in the world that I ever had that I loved going to work every single day was when I was a dispatcher.
Gotcha.
So the position came open where they had a dispatch spot open back up at the sheriff's office, and they asked me if I wanted it. I'm like, absolutely. I will be there tomorrow. And I started, that was 12 years ago, that I started back as that and worked my way up, and now I'm the dispatch supervisor for the sheriff's department. I'm over the dispatchers for the sheriff's department. We cover 5 law enforcement agencies and 8 fire departments there.
Wow.
In Carter County. And that's basically what I do now. I do run in 2014, went through the FBI's crisis negotiation school in Oklahoma City. And I'm the lead crisis negotiator, hostage negotiator for the Sheriff's Department's tactical team. And we are just starting their peer counseling team for law enforcement for law enforcement officers and first responders that have gone through bad situations to where they need somebody to talk to. They need to vent and we're trying to get that up and running to where that's available to them if they need it.
Sure. So that's something I think that is interesting, and I don't think that the average person in society thinks very much about that. But as a law enforcement officer, or really anyone that works in emergency services, you, as part of your job, are exposed to a lot of extremely traumatic events and situations, and you see things that are just, absolutely terrible.
Right.
And so as a result of that, the suicide rate in the law enforcement community is very high, and
every year,
and it's been going up lately.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it's been going up. The environment around law enforcement has gotten to be such a tense environment, and there's so many, like you said, there's so many pressures on law enforcement as far as not just social pressures, but just the job in general.
Mm-hmm.
Law enforcement, first responders, they see the worst life has to offer all the time. That is
Mm-hmm.
the constant bombardment of the worst things that could possibly happen. You just think of the worst situations that you could ever have in your life, and law enforcement, first responders just go from call to call dealing with people that are going through the worst possible circumstance or incident in their life every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And that it takes a toll.
Mm-hmm.
It really wears on somebody after a while. When I was on the street, that's one of the things. Not only I'm having a child and I don't want him to grow up in this environment, but it was starting to get to me. It was starting to really wear down 5 years of every single, and I know as on a law enforcement perspective, a lot of those guys, 5 years on the street is not a long time.
Sure.
But to the normal person, 5 years of that type of stuff, that's a lot. That's
Mm-hmm.
a lot for somebody to shoulder and take on. And working suicides and homicides and just accidental deaths and stuff like that. When I was on the street, a lot of the times I had gone to a school called Criminal Investigation Academy. And basically that's 3 weeks of crime scene investigation stuff. So when something bad happened, somebody that's been through that school, you usually get the phone call, you're out taking fingerprints, you're out taking photographs, you're doing that stuff. And so when you see that stuff, it does wear on you after a while. And some of it, you try to just shove it back. You
Mm-hmm.
try to man up and you try to put it back. But now you realize that you can't do that. Eventually it's like filling this glass up. You can keep putting stuff in it, you keep putting stuff in it, but eventually it's going to start spilling over.
Sure.
And the more you put in it, the faster you put in it, the faster it's going to happen. And you try to deny that. I'm a tough guy. I can put this stuff back. I can hold on to it until the day that you go home and your wife just asks how your day went, and you just lose it. And it got to the point that I was tired of that part of it.
Sure.
And so changed a little bit of the perspective of my job,
Mm-hmm.
and started doing a few other things. And then, like I said, when we got back into the dispatch part of it, the dispatch part of it was what I was made to do. That's what the good Lord put me on earth to do.
Right.
I fully believe that. And that's how I got my start, and that's where I'll finish. I'll probably be there until they fire me or I die.
Yeah, there you go. Well, it's, I'm glad to have somebody that works in the emergency services law enforcement arena that is happy with their job and doesn't,
Right.
Because a lot of the people that I talk to, when you bring up, job satisfaction,
Mm-hmm.
they start talking about the stress, the
Right.
toll that it takes on their marriage,
Absolutely.
the separation that they feel from their children, things like that. And so, but that is part of the reason why you are working with, to form this organization that provides peer, not necessarily counseling, but I guess it is kind of
when you come out of the training, they individual peer counselor, group peer counseling.
Mm-hmm.
We're not licensed psychological professionals, but we are somebody that can sit down and have a conversation with somebody to help them vent those emotions and try to help them through that situation.
Well, and I was talking with Rodney.
Mm-hmm.
I think you and I ended up
Yes.
connecting because you listened to Rodney's podcast, and Rodney told that story, and he mentioned, like, it's kind of odd for me to be talking with somebody else who feels like that they had a really rough upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I know that they didn't experience a lot of the traumatic events. And I actually said to him, it's like, have you ever looked at someone and said, hey, have you ever had human brains on you?
Yeah.
Because I have, right? So don't put yourself on my same level.
Right.
And it's that way for law enforcement officers.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Like, have you ever, seen a murdered baby? Yes, I have. Okay. Well, I can't talk to a counselor about that who hasn't.
Absolutely not.
Right. And so that's why the peer counseling is so important.
Absolutely. It's important from all aspects of law enforcement, from the first responders, medics, firefighters, all of it up. They need somebody that they can connect with. I can't sit down and talk to a firefighter about what they went through going through a burning building because I've never been there and done that.
Right.
I can talk to law enforcement because I've been there and done that. I can talk to dispatchers because I do that every day. And that's something that's what got me into the peer counseling, is the dispatch side of it, because 911 dispatchers, telecommunicators are really overlooked in a lot of that stuff. And you listen to and hear stuff that you are completely helpless on all the time. I mean, being a law enforcement officer that can go in there and help's one thing. Being on the other end of the phone,
and you're hearing someone scream while they look at their dead loved one.
Yep, absolutely. It is something that, and I've gone through those situations where I needed to talk to somebody and there was nobody there. And I thought, I'm never going to let that happen to anybody else. My people are never going to have to go through that type of thing alone anymore.
Right.
So we took the steps in my department to start up that peer counseling team. And we're just in the baby stages of it, getting it there, but it's coming along.
Gotcha. Well, that's exciting. And I don't know if you've listened to all my my podcast episodes, but I think it was episode 3 with Ernie. He talked about depression, and I shared in that episode that my younger brother committed suicide a few years ago. And so part of what I hope that this podcast does is give people hope, and people who are struggling with depression and those types of dealing with those types of life events, that they know that it's okay to reach out and get help, that it's not that you're not manly enough to man up and take care of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
that it's okay.
Absolutely.
And especially, those that live in a more traumatic life, whether it be that you're in law enforcement or you live in a really rough neighborhood and you see a lot of traumatic things, it's okay that causes problems and you can go get help. But so kind of moving past that, and I shared this with you. One of my really good friends, Philip, he and I were talking about the Colin Kaepernick kneeling before games and whatnot. And for those of you who don't know Philip, he's an African-American guy. And I'm a person who seeks to understand, right? So when I saw people kneeling during the national anthem, I didn't see any association between that and, the experiences that they were trying to bring change to in law enforcement. And so, it frustrated me, and I asked him, can you explain it to me? Because I want to understand. And what I discovered is that there's a definite disconnect between, especially the African-American community and law enforcement. And so part of what I want to do is get people that have had experiences on both sides of that coin, bring them onto the podcast and have them share their personal experiences, see if we can't build some bridges and create some understanding. So one of the things that surprised me in some of the conversations that I've had is the lack of knowledge that the average, civilian, if you will, has about law enforcement officer training.
Right.
And so, can you share with the public some of the things that you were taught during training that cause you to behave in maybe more of authoritarian way when you're interacting with the public?
When we came out of academy, it was, you were young, you were going through all these seasoned officers teaching you how to do the job the career path that you've chosen. There were so many, I fully graduated academy feeling like within the first year of my law enforcement career, I was either going to be killed or I was going to do something that was going to cause me to get sued to where my family was going to be living on the street. They just, you're constantly trained to be on that level of alertness. You get to where you don't want to be complacent about anything. Mm-hmm. Even when you go into just something as simple as, in my entire law enforcement career, a good explanation for it is when I walk through the door of a convenience store and the clerk's not there, I immediately stop. I stop at the door, start looking around. Okay, why is the clerk not here? Because there's always the chance that she could be tied up in the back. There could be a robbery in progress going on back there in the back. Anybody else on the street walks in and the clerk's not there, they don't think anything about it. They just keep on going their way. You're taught to have that to not let complacency kill you. Complacency kills. Complacency kills. So you're taught to be on that high alert, going balls to the wall all the time, because as soon as you let that guard down, somebody's going to kill you. That's really they try to pound that into you. It could be overkill just to try to keep officers alive and make sure they don't make mistakes that get them killed. And that's a hard thing to break. That's a hard thing to get past. Because not everybody's out to kill you. Everybody knows that. That's a common sense thing, but there's always that chance. There's always in the back of your head, if I let my guard down for a minute, if I come down off this alertness, that something's going to happen.
Yeah, but the flip side to that you alluded to is the opposite of that, right? Because they're telling you be vigilant.
Right.
Complacency kills, but they're also telling you it's just as likely that your vigilance is going to cause you to overreact in a situation, and you are going to be sued and ruined financially because you were trying to do what we trained you to do. Right. Is that correct?
Yeah, to an extent, yes. They don't put it to you in those terms,
right? Of course not.
But they're not going to put it to you like that. But they do. It's one of those things. There are always people like to sue police officers. People are waiting for you to make a mistake to where they can sue you, and you're getting sued for every single little thing. So you've always got that in the back of your mind too. Am I going to do something that's going to cause me to get sued? Am I going to do something that's caused me to get killed? So you're at that hypervigilance all the time. And it's just from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed at night.
God, that'd be so taxing.
It is. And that's one of those things. It's taxing on your family. It's taxing on your marriage. It's taxing on your kids because you're here all the time. And that's one of the things that make the suicide rate, the divorce rate, and everything so hard. It's because when you're way up here at that hypervigilance all the time, and you come home and you try to come and you relax off that, trying to get off of it, you'll go deep down into almost like the depression, where all I want to do is sit and watch TV all day. I don't want to interact with my family. I don't want to do anything but just decompress. And I want to sit there. And so that's all your family sees.
Something that's mindless.
Something where I'm not having to think and make decisions all the time. It is so difficult. You hear the jokes about you can't get you and your wife to decide where to go to dinner. You sit there and drive around for 6 hours looking for a good place to go eat. It's even worse for law enforcement because I don't want to make that decision. You just decide what you want to do and you tell me, and that's what we're going to do. I spend my entire day making decision after decision after decision at split seconds. I don't want to do that when I get home.
Right.
So you drop off that hypervigilance, and all your family sees is the guy that sits on the couch that gets mad all the time at the drop of a hat because the day he had was really, really worse than any day anybody else has probably ever experienced in their life. There's no middle ground there. You're either way up here or you're way down there. And that's where the suicide, the divorce rate, and all that stuff comes in.
Yeah. That actually reminds me of the interview that we did with the founders of Divine Equine. He talked about coming back from his military service and how, he was a security contractor and things like that. And that when he would come back to stateside, he was so used to looking for threats and, roadside bombs and all of that stuff that he was up here all the time. And that, he was diagnosed with PTSD. And it sounds very similar to a PTSD type reaction.
Then the PTSD rate in law enforcement is high. Not as high as military. I'm not going to pretend that it is, but it's still up there.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that I was hoping that you could share with the public, and they don't have to be personal stories, but stories that you personally know of. Can you tell the public some situations that you or your law enforcement friends have had to deal with that have affected the way that you interact with the public? Traumatic things, things that surprisingly became dangerous.
Everything. There's it surprisingly became dangerous. There's so many of those. Just things can flip on a dime, and that has nothing to do with culture or race or anything. That could be any situation at any given time can just turn in a hurry. Where you go to a domestic because this woman's been beat up by her boyfriend or her husband, and okay, we're here, time to take the situation and take charge. Okay, he's beat you up, time to go to jail. We put handcuffs on him. Oh, I don't want him to go to jail. And then she starts beating on you because you're taking her boyfriend to jail. So you've been called to a situation where
just
I want help
to
rescue her. And then now I'm trying to rescue her. And no, don't take him to jail. And you're getting the hell beat out of you by somebody that doesn't want their boyfriend to go to jail now.
Right.
So there's situations like that. As far as cultural, just the way people look at law enforcement. It's, if you'll sit down and talk to people, like we were talking about earlier, where every incident that they've had with law enforcement has been bad. Negative experiences. And it doesn't happen where I'm from. It doesn't happen that often. I mean, as far as large cities and stuff like that go, you don't hear about stuff like that very often. But you talk to people from other agencies and other big cities and stuff like that. They do have that situations where they do have, no matter what the culture is, sometimes you just have a negative experience about it. Like I said, we were talking about earlier, one of the instances that come to mind to me that kind of changed the way I looked at a lot of stuff, just simple things that I do, is we had an incident where a family called because they were out hunting and one of the family members got lost in the woods. Mm-hmm. So they go home. This was showing my age, but this is pre-cell phone days. Mm-hmm. So they had to drive back to the house to use the phone to call us. So we go to the house. It's an African-American family. I pick up one of the relatives. I said, okay, go show me where you were when you were hunting. We drive out there, and he and I are staging right there where they went into the woods trying to make contact over my PA system and all that other good stuff. I had officers, wildlife officers and other deputies out on the roads trying to see, making sure if this guy comes out, we can find him on the side of the road. And I'm sitting there, and it was cold, and we were in and out of the car to the heater all the time. And my front seat of my car, like most law enforcement cars, has got so much junk in it, so much stuff we need to do our jobs. You can't sit in the front passenger seat. So most everybody's got to sit in the back. So he was sitting in the back, and I'd have to get up and let him out of his car. I let him out of the car so we would get outside and walk around and holler for him and holler over my PA. And every time I got out of the car, we just called it the deputy's pose. I would put my hand on my holster, because you can't get your hands in your pockets. You've got so much stuff on. So instead of just standing there like in.
This is Randy Sullivan with the Randall Sullivan Home Selling Team and the host of Bourbon Real Talk. Producing a podcast is time-consuming and expensive, and Bourbon Real Talk wants to maintain its integrity by not promoting products and services that it doesn't believe in. For this reason, I've opted to have my real estate team sponsor this program. The Randall Sullivan Home Selling Team has operated since 2008. We've sold almost 500 homes. We have proprietary programs that make a massive difference to the outcome of our clients, and we service the entire North Texas area. If you live in North Texas and you need to buy or sell a home, please give us a chance to explain how our services could benefit you. We understand that not all of our listeners live in North Texas. We also know that not all real estate agents are created equal. If you need a real estate agent outside of North Texas, the Randall Sullivan Home Selling Team has access to tools to help you find a highly qualified agent in your area. The service is free for you, and we stick around through the end of the process to help you with your transaction, even when we're not your agent. If you have a real estate transaction in your future, please reach out to us at randallsullivanteam.com, Facebook, Instagram, or just give us a call at 214-385-9101.
Like a gorilla with your hands hanging down. You got to put them somewhere. So I'm just putting it on my holster. Well, he saw that as me touching my gun every time he got out of the car, and he saw that as a sign of aggression. And he called me on it. He's like, "You're touching your gun every time we get out of this car. What is the deal? Is it because I'm black? What's the problem?" And it was just me resting my hand on my gun. Some simple act like that had nothing. I was not seeing this man as an aggression at all. I'm just trying to help him find his family member. Mm-hmm. And that simple act, because all of his interactions with law enforcement had been negative, he saw that as something negative. Mm-hmm. So it was a conscious thing from then on out. Even the smallest little thing you do, whether you mean to or not, can cause confusion and cause a misunderstanding between somebody of another culture that doesn't understand why you're doing that simple act you're doing. They're seeing it as something complex when it was just a simple act of something. Right. Not in any way saying a lot of the negative interactions were something so simple. Mm-hmm. But some stuff like that does happen. So it makes you conscious of that type of thing from your interactions then on out.
Right. So if you had to guess, how many dead people have you seen? Ballpark. Plus or minus 20%.
Plus or minus 20%. 30.
How many were children?
Probably 5 under the age of 18.
Okay. And how many of those were not accidental?
Well, I'm not going to say the majority. I would say probably by not accidental, I'm going to include suicide in that too.
Sure.
I would say probably 50-50.
Okay.
Probably suicide and accident more than anything else.
Mhm.
Homicides, even in the grand scope of things, in an agency that has hundreds of deaths a year,
Mhm.
in the grand scope of things, homicide is a very
Pretty
small fraction of that.
percentage, yeah.
So accidents, homicide, or accidents and suicide is
Suicide are
probably the
the
highest.
majority. Yeah. And so that definitely has to take a toll on you.
Absolutely.
How many times have you heard of a law enforcement officer in your career that was physically harmed, got into some sort of a physical altercation, was attacked, punched, and let's leave out like stabbings and shootings.
Right.
How often does that happen?
It's not as often as you think of on the roadway, on the street. Patrol officers, they get into that situation twice a month. In my agency, I'm going to say twice a month. There's some sort of altercation where there's some sort of physical altercation with a person like that.
Mm-hmm.
When you get into the correction side of it, into the detention side of it, I would say weekly.
Almost weekly.
Yeah, almost weekly for those guys. My agency holds 185 inmates, and sometimes there's altercations between those guys. So you get a lot of that in the confinement situation.
Right.
There's a lot of that type of stuff on the streets, probably a couple a month.
Mm-hmm. And in your career, how many times have you known of an officer in your area who was seriously harmed, shot, or stabbed? Or
I've known several of them. My father, more times than I could count, came home with some sort of injury, some broken nose, broken hand, just all sorts of stuff like that, just from altercations that he had over the years. And that's just my father. On the other side of the coin, I've had, I don't know that I could put a number on the times that I've seen guys go to the hospital over some sort of incidents.
Mm-hmm.
Guys being bit, have to go to getting an altercation, get bit, have to go, and have to start drawing blood. You have to get tested for
everything,
hepatitis and HIV and all that other good stuff.
Huh.
Just from that you would be surprised how often stuff like that happens.
Really?
Yep.
Really. And so that has to have a pretty big impact on the law enforcement officers, like vigilance level,
absolutely,
when they go out to interact with the public.
Because they specifically call it hypervigilance. You're at that level all the time because you're going into a situation. Okay, last time this happened, so boy broke my nose and sent me to the hospital. I can't let that happen again.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's why there are so many. No matter what the culture, there are so many incidences of officers. They think they're being rude. They're he was so hateful to me. He made me do stuff that he shouldn't have made me do.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that they teach us is if you can't see somebody's hands, they can kill you.
Mm-hmm.
So when an officer goes up to a situation, get your hands out of your pocket. And they'll take that tone. Get your hands out of your pocket. You need to get your hands out of your pocket now.
Mm-hmm.
The person on the other side doesn't understand why he's doing that. I've just got my hands in my pockets. What's the big deal?
Right.
Well, he's taught if I can't see your hands,
you can kill me.
You could kill me.
Right.
And you got two sides not knowing you got somebody not realizing what the officer's trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes you could probably catch more flies with sugar than vinegar.
Mm-hmm. But you could also die.
Right. So you got to take that. Do you want to approach this person and be like, hey, would you get your hands out of your pockets for me? And they pull out a gun and kill you, or stand so many feet away and pivot yourself like you're supposed to, and
be ready to
draw your weapon if you have to,
yeah,
and not get killed.
Right. So let's talk about training. So when you're training as a law enforcement officer, you already talked about them training you about hypervigilance, but also trying to scare you about overreactions. Did you see police training videos where police officers were being injured in routine situations?
Absolutely. I mean, that's just constant. I mean,
there's ongoing training.
Yeah, ongoing training too, and just officers in general sitting around talking around coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, did you see this officer? This video of this body cam footage of this officer in such and such state that went to this domestic or went to interview this guy, and he just got him out of the house, and before he could do anything, the guy pulled a pistol and shot and killed him there on the front porch. There's a constant bombardment of that stuff, even in training, especially for young officers. Now you start getting into more advanced training and stuff like that, there's less of that. But they show you pictures of the female officer that went up and talked to this guy in just a routine traffic stop, and he's got warrants for his arrest, and she knows about it. She's trying to talk to him about it. The next thing you know, he punches her in the face, and she's down on the ground. He's just pounding and pounding and pounding her until she can't hardly breathe, and gets up and tells his young daughter that's in the car with him, "Baby, I can't go to jail again." And they get up and they drive off.
I've actually seen that video.
Yeah, the other video.
It's a state trooper. It was I think it was a female African American officer.
I think so. Yeah.
And I think about that every time somebody complains about a law enforcement officer being rude or aggressive. I think about that video, and I think about how would I respond after I saw that video. He actually apologized to her.
Right. Yeah, I do.
He actually says to her at the end of the video, he said, I'm sorry, but I can't go back to jail."
Right.
And he runs to go get back into his car, and a passerby sees the officer down and ends up following him, and they find him and they catch him. Right. And he went to jail for a whole lot longer than he would have if he had just gone, done what he was supposed to do. But that's something that I've tried to bring up to people, is that you don't know what these law enforcement officers are, being trained about hypervigilance. You don't know the training videos that they're seeing. And so with regard to the way that you interact with people, are they basically telling you, tell, don't ask? Like, you can't afford to take the time to be Mr. Nice Guy?
Nobody ever comes out and says, and by no means does any of the training encourage you to be an asshole all the time. I mean, I'm not saying that in the least.
But doesn't that happen naturally when you're hearing about all these, you're having all these negative interactions?
Right.
You're hearing about negative interactions that turn sideways very quickly.
Right.
Doesn't it happen on its own?
It does. And that's one of the reasons it does turn sideways, is because when you ask in a nice tone for somebody to do something, they don't understand why you're asking them to do that, and they don't do it. Okay, now I'm going to take it up a level. Now we're going from, okay, I tried the nice guy approach and that's not working, time to be an asshole. And so you're stepping it up because the person's not doing what you asked them to do. The person on the other side is not even understanding why you're asking them to do that. They're trying to wrap their mind around that. Now you've got two minds going at 100 miles an hour trying to figure out what the other one's doing, and it just causes confusion that starts escalating up way too quickly.
Right. And that's something that I don't think that that people understand, right? Because if you've ever been in a physical altercation, right? It feels like everything's going a million miles an hour, right? Law enforcement officers experience that when they're on calls, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, that video of that woman being, and it actually collapsed her face, and she almost died of asphyxiation. He didn't even have a gun, a knife, nothing. He just hit her, and he was so big and she was so small, and he hit her so hard that she almost died, and she was permanently disfigured.
Completely ended her career. She had to have reconstructive surgery.
Just from that one moment of not being vigilant. And I don't know that she didn't do anything wrong. There was nothing she could have done. But if you've seen that, and that's in the back of your mind when you're interacting, and somebody's got their hands in their pockets, and you say, "Hey, would you please take your hands out of your pockets?" and they don't.
Right. Well, and in your mind is, okay, why are they not taking their hands out of their pocket now? Do they have something they're trying to hide? And so you've got that going through your mind, while the person on the other, especially in something completely innocent, is thinking, why is this asshole coming up to me yelling at me about taking my hands out of my pockets? Right. And because a lot of other cultures and stuff like that, that's something disrespectful. If you come up to somebody on the street just as a common citizen to citizen and start barking orders at somebody like that, they're going to take it as a sign of disrespect. And why are you treating me this way? Why are you? So you, as an officer, you kind of got to be aware of that part of it too. But it's hard to do that and not think about the whole complacency kills thing, where if I bring it down a notch, something bad could happen. There's a reason this guy's not taking his hands out of his pocket. What is it? Is it something as simple as he doesn't understand, or does he have a gun and he's about to kill me?
Yeah. So are there any other warning signs that you get trained, eye movements, like trigger words, anything like that?
A lot of body stuff, a lot of body language.
Uh-huh.
Like one of the prime
As
examples.
specific as you can be, because I want people to know that.
As a lot as something is when people run, when something's happening, and even if it's not going to be a physical altercation, if they're looking to run, they start looking for their way out. So when you're talking to somebody and you're face to face like you and I are, and you're trying to explain something to them, and they know that, okay, something's probably fixing to go down, I'm probably fixing to go to jail, they start looking over their shoulder, start looking for a way out.
You know what that means.
This person's probably, I know what that means. This person's probably fixing to run from me.
Right.
And
so,
like
so if you're out there in the public and you're interacting with a law enforcement officer and you start looking around for your friends that were with you, or you start looking to see if anyone's got a cell phone out, you may not know that you're communicating to that officer that he needs to ratchet up the aggression and potentially immediately put you in handcuffs because you're about to flee. Right. And so people need to know that.
Right.
Anything else?
Crossing their arms, stuff like that. Something as simple as we're having a conversation like this. Okay, once you start crossing your arms, you're starting to get in that defensive. You're putting this is a barrier between you and the other person. You're putting.
I know that from counseling, but I didn't know that.
And it's the same thing in law enforcement. You're putting that barrier in between. You're starting to try to get that separation between he and yourself, and that's just one of the tales that they look at. Okay, this guy's starting to get real frustrated. There's there could be a problem here.
Right. Could escalate to an altercation. So one of the things that I was taught when I got licensed for my concealed carry was that when you're in a routine traffic stop, that you should keep your hands on the steering wheel so that the officer can see them.
Yep. Keep them where they can see them. Yeah,
so in all interactions with law enforcement, you would recommend that people keep their hands where the police officer can see them.
Right. And that's something even I would do as I'm down here in Texas. And if something were to happen, I were to get stopped by a trooper or something like that, I'm going to keep my hands up where I can see them, just because I know that's what I would want somebody to do if I was in his situation.
I was even taught that, if they ask me for my proof of insurance, that I should ask permission to reach into my glove box before I did so. And so I was also taught to call the police officer, and not like Mr. or Sir.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm a white man, obviously, so. This doesn't mean much, but I've always, when pulled over, I keep my hands on the steering wheel. I look the officer in his face. I don't look at his gun. I don't look away. I keep my hands on the steering wheel, and if I have to reach for something, I ask his permission.
Right.
My proof of insurance is in my glove compartment. Are you okay if I reach in there?
Right. And that's perfectly acceptable. That's something I don't think anybody would think was overkill or anything like that. And if I'm in a situation like that, if I get stopped on the side of the road and I've got somebody sitting there asking me for that stuff, okay, you've got your insurance with you. Yeah, it's in my glove box right over here. And explain to him, yes, it's over here in the glove box, and kind of imply that's why I'm reaching over here to the glove box to get it. I would probably not think as far as ask permission to do it like that. If he's asking me for insurance, he probably wants it. This is where it's at. That's why I'm reaching over here to get it, or it's in my console. Let me get it.
Right. And so there almost needs to be the public needs to start to develop a hypervigilance when they're interacting with law enforcement, because they need to understand that the law enforcement officer is on high alert because of training, because of experiences that they've had, and almost give the benefit of the doubt, I would think, because you don't know. They might have just started their shift, and right before they started, they found out that one of their buddies from the force got killed in a traffic stop. Right? You don't know.
It could have been one of those things where this is the first traffic stop they made after they worked one of those scenes where somebody did kill their baby. Somebody was in a massive car accident where this family of 4 was killed on the interstate or something like that. You never know what that officer's coming off of.
Right.
And not that that's an excuse for bad behavior or anything like that, but still that type of thing does happen.
Sure. So let's talk about, because we talked a little bit about how you interact. So keep your hands, don't cross your arms. Do law enforcement officers like it when you look towards their face, or
that's never something I've had any necessarily training for or anything like that.
Okay.
Because that's something you can't really take at face value all the time. Some people are they are uncomfortable looking at you in the face.
Yeah.
There's some people that have that personality where that makes them uncomfortable.
Right. Well, I mean, even me, I get like level 10 nervous when I'm interacting with law enforcement.
Right. Yeah.
And one time I was getting a speeding ticket when I was in college, and I was like donating plasma to have enough money to buy paper plates, which I had to wash. Like I was super poor. So this ticket was going to be a big deal. And I was like kind of having an anxiety attack. And the police officer said, you are really nervous.
Right.
Like, is there something you need to tell me?
And you can tell when somebody's nervous.
Right.
Like that. And that's something absolutely you pick up on that.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, it could be something simple. I'm just stopping you because your taillight was out, but man, you're sure nervous about something. What else is going on here?
Right.
And at the end of the traffic stop, it may be something you thought you had a traffic warrant from 10 years ago when you got a ticket 3 towns over.
Right.
And you're like, oh my God, I was afraid I was going to jail. And there's no warrant for your arrest, and you were nervous for nothing. And everybody was ramped up for no particular reason, just off of a misunderstanding.
So it'd be better for the public to try to develop a calm posture when they're interacting with.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've heard it said 1,000 times. If you've never done anything wrong, you're not. If you haven't done anything wrong, you're not going to jail.
Right.
One of those type deals. So I mean, but it's easy to have that attitude when you've had only positive interactions with law enforcement. If you've had nothing but negative interactions for law enforcement, that type of attitudes, that type of incidents is just going to go out the window. You're not going to buy that line.
Sure.
But I mean, even as me in law enforcement, if I'm traveling somewhere and I do have my sidearm and something in the car with me, as soon as somebody steps to the car, officer gets up to the window, I stopped you. No, sir, I don't. But I do need you to let you know I'm a law enforcement officer from another state or another county or something like that, and I do have my firearm in the car because I don't want any misunderstanding with that going. Because, I mean, if for some reason it slides out from underneath the seat and he sees it or something comes out, I want him to know that that's there.
Right.
And then I'm probably going to get asked the question, well, where's it at? Okay, it's under my seat. It's in my console. It's in my glove box or something like that. So he knows that that's where it's at.
And I was trained to do the same thing when I concealed carry, to disclose to the police officer, because they know when they pull you over if you have a concealed carry license.
Yeah, sometimes they do. In certain states, do put it like that, and put on the driver's license information. Yeah. But in the state of Oklahoma, you're compelled to. If you're
you have. Well, I don't know how it is now, but when I got licensed, you had to give them both licenses.
Right.
And then the police officer had the right to ask, "Do you have your firearm?" And then you would disclose whether or not you had it with you, where it was, and if he wanted to secure the weapon while he was interacting with you, that was his right, and you shouldn't complain about that. Right.
In Oklahoma, you're compelled to let them know if you've got the firearms in the car. I don't necessarily have to see your license or anything like that, but I'm traveling with my concealed carry permit and I have my gun in my car. As soon as that officer comes up there, by law, I have to tell him I've got that, or otherwise I'm in violation of the And that's now. And let me back up. That is the way it was when I was processing handgun licenses stuff several years ago. If something's changed like that now, I don't know, but that's the way it always was. And that's a good practice, whether it's changed or not.
So let's talk about the training that you received for when someone that you're interacting with has a knife. What did they tell you in training? When should you be nervous? How should you respond?
If somebody has a knife in their hand and they're within 21 feet of you, they can kill you.
Before you
draw your weapon. Or even if you've got your weapon out and you shoot somebody to stop them within 21 feet, they can still, just off physics alone, make it to you with the knife.
With the knife, right.
And like I said, we're talking years ago, I'm showing my age again. That was the training I had when I went to academy. If they're within 21 feet of you, they can kill you with that knife.
Yeah. So if you have ever seen a video of an officer-involved shooting where the assailant had a knife and the officer had a gun, and it seemed like an overreaction, just go Google, or not Google, but YouTube search, police officer knife training. I've watched a couple of those videos, and in lightning fast speed,
Absolutely.
the trainer can cross a large span of space.
Yep.
And a lot of times when law enforcement officers are dealing with somebody who has a weapon, there's drugs or alcohol involved, which from my understanding can also impact the ability for a firearm to stop them immediately.
Right. Yeah, if somebody's been on meth for the last 2 days, it's going to be harder to stop that person if they're determined to do something.
Right.
A normal citizen.
I saw one video one time of a guy that was robbing like a Brinks truck or something like that, and they shot him 9 times with a 9mm, and he kept coming because he was on some drug. And
we go back, kind of going back to the videos of law enforcement that you show in training and stuff like that. One of the ones that I'll never forget, and I mean anybody that's ever seen it will never forget. There was a trooper, I don't remember what state he was from, but Trooper Coates, and he was shot and killed by a guy on the traffic stop that had some dope in his pocket. Everything was going fine, but the guy kept putting his hands in his pocket. Sir, why do you keep putting your hands in your pocket? What's in your pocket? What's in your pocket? And he went to come over here and pat him down. But which, if you Terry stop, patting somebody down is something that is granted to the law enforcement by the Supreme Court. You have the ability to do that if you think that there's a situation. You have the right to pat somebody down for a weapon. Puts his hands on his car. Sure enough, what was in his pocket was a .22 pistol. And Trooper Coates shot that man 6 times with the .357 Magnum, and that guy shot Trooper Coates 2 times with that .22 pistol and killed the trooper, and the other guy lived. Just, and you've got stuff like that that you can. I'll never forget that video. It's something I've seen 4 or 5 times when I was going through training at first, and I'll never forget that as long as I live.
Wow. So let's kind of move past that. Thinking about, because a lot of the bigger like national reports that I've seen where there were officer involved shootings, a lot of times I've seen non-compliance where the person who ultimately got shot, at some point they were asked to do something by the police officer, and they refused to do it. Right. In your training, is there ever a scenario where it's okay for somebody to refuse to comply with a request?
There are some stuff that we run into a lot of, especially over the last few years. You have people coming in, and this is kind of a very unique situation, filming a lot of buildings. They'll come in, their theory is they're testing the transparency of the office or something like that by coming in with a recorder or some sort of camera or something like that, just wanting to talk to people walking through the building with a video camera. And that in itself kind of triggers okay, something's wrong here. Why is this person walking through it? So you go, sir, do you mind stop filming? They don't have to stop filming if they want to, and they refuse. No, sir, I don't have to. It's my right to film in this public space if I want to. Yeah, you're right. I can't make you stop. Could you show me your ID? I don't have to show you my ID if I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not driving a car. Yep, sir, you're absolutely right. I can't make you leave. Be safe in what you're doing. Now, you get that attitude from law enforcement. Sometimes that's why they test these things is, okay, that goes into that hypervigilance of, you're not doing what I asked you to do. You're sitting here being a nuisance. You're just being a jerk to me. You need to leave. And then it turns into a bigger ball because they're testing the law enforcement, trying to get them to do that.
They're trying to get them to act wrong. Yeah.
And so there are situations where, you're right. You don't have to show me your ID if you don't want to.
Are there any, I guess the point that I was driving at is not do they have the legal right, but are there any scenarios where a police officer is giving a command and non-compliance is the right choice for the person that's not going to escalate the situation?
I don't think so. I mean, I can't think of any situation personally for me, if I'm sitting there and an officer is sitting there and I can tell by the tone of his voice that he's getting keyed up or he's got his gun out and he's telling me to do something, I need to do everything he's telling me to do.
Right. And we can sort the rest out later, right?
We can sort the rest out later. And because, I mean,
sometimes if a police officer, if you're a woman and a police officer demands that you perform some sort of sexual act, by all means, say no.
No, absolutely.
But if a police officer says, show me your hands,
Yeah.
If the police officer says, lay down on the ground or
Mhm.
whatever it is that the police officer says,
Right.
he may be overreacting. He may even be violating your rights. If he says, stop filming,
Mhm.
right? And that you don't have to stop filming, I'd still probably stop filming.
Yeah, I mean,
right? Just because.
That's just me personally. Yes,
Right. Because what I want people to understand that law enforcement officers sacrifice almost everything. They sacrifice their families, their lives, their mental well-being, all of that stuff to be in this. And it's not because they're hoping that one day they get a chance to kill someone,
not.
right? Now, are there bad apples? Abso-freaking-lutely, right? There are bad apples. Right. There's racist police officers. There's people that have been at it for too long that they're just too jaded and they no longer have the patience that it takes to perform their role. There's all of that stuff. But the average police officer should be pitied by the public because they've sacrificed themselves to do something that they think is greater than themselves. Is that fair?
That's a fair statement. And I mean, you're going to get a lot of people to say, that's what they signed up for, and it's the truth. That's
of course, right. You said the same thing about military people. They get blown up by a roadside bomb.
Right.
Right.
But I mean, we don't go into that situation. We want to help people. That's what we get to. We didn't do this because the money's good. We didn't do it because it's some glamorous job you may get a few people that have that attitude towards it, but most people that get into this profession legitimately want to help. Mm-hmm. And we don't go into the situation. We hope we never have to shoot anybody. That would be one of them. To me, that would be one of the most dreadful things that I would ever have to do is to take somebody's life in the performance of my job.
Right.
And you don't come to work every day. I hope today's the day I kill somebody. That is not. I don't know in my entire career have I ever heard that from anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just. I don't think that.
Right. And so
if they don't need to be in this job.
Sure. And those people are out there. So one of the things that
this is Randy Sullivan with RSHST Capital LLC and the host of Bourbon Real Talk. Producing a podcast is time consuming and expensive, and Bourbon Real Talk wants to maintain its integrity by not promoting products or services that it doesn't believe in. For this reason, I have opted to have my funding company sponsor this program. RSHST Capital is the first of its kind funding company that provides pay-at-close funding to home sellers out of their equity. If you have a home to sell, need money for renovations or repairs to maximize your profit, money to stop pending foreclosure or to keep your mortgage current, or cash for really anything, then look into RSHST Capital. This program is simple. We verify that you have equity, approve you for a funding amount. You have access to that cash at practically a moment's notice for only a nominal fee. This program is raising sellers cash after closing by tens of thousands of dollars, stopping foreclosures and changing people's financial future. You pick your real estate agent, your contractor, and have access to actual cash or contracting expenses with zero upfront cost. This is a nationwide program, so if you have any curiosity about how it works, please look us up at rshstcapital.com, Facebook, or just give us a call at 214-385-9101.
That I have learned as I've gone around and I've talked with people that have had negative interactions with law enforcement is part of what creates the separation is one, the lack of transparency, right? So you are the fifth or sixth law enforcement officer that I asked to come on my podcast.
Right.
No one else is allowed to talk about these things.
Right.
They all sign some, social media agreement or whatever, and it says they can lose their job. And so I think, what do you think as somebody that's had your entire career in law enforcement about that lack of transparency? Is that something that you view as a necessary evil?
Sometimes it is. I mean, sometimes we all understand that there's things on social media that completely get blown out of proportion, that once it's there, it can be twisted or manipulated to where it's not exactly what it was supposed to be. Or it's not exactly the way it will come out. I think there's a lot of that. There's a reason that there is some of that stuff.
Well, it makes sense that that's why it started. but now, like,
Right.
now it's like, okay, now there's a problem,
Absolutely.
right? Law enforcement agencies are having a hard time recruiting new officers,
It's horrible.
right?
Absolutely the worst I've ever seen.
Right. And so I heard a news report this week that there's a municipality that's offering a $10,000 sign-on bonus for law enforcement officers to switch municipalities because they cannot find new recruits.
Because nobody wants to do it.
No one wants to do it. It's a thankless job. It doesn't pay well. There used to be a certain amount of respect that you got from society, but with all of the negative media and the stuff that's in social media, now, you know, that one like benefit that you got as a law enforcement officer of people looking at you and going, you know what, you've done a good thing for society. That's almost gone at this point. Right.
Absolutely.
And so my fear is that the people that'll press past that, that are still willing to go into it, are even more likely to be the person that has a chip on their shoulder or who wants power or whatever. I'm not saying that that's the case. I'm just saying, like, this could become a self-fulfilling prophecy for those that think that there's a problem in law enforcement. If you put so much pressure on them that the only people that are willing to do the jobs are the ones that are like, I just want to be able to tell people what they have to do, right? Those are not the people that you want in law enforcement. What you want is the civil servant, the person that says, I want to make my life matter, and I want to do it by serving the other people in my community. That's who you want in law enforcement, but we're inadvertently chasing those people away. Just like you wanted to be on the streets.
Right. Yes, I wanted
but
to.
But you had to get off, right?
Yeah, yes.
And
that's just
and you know, is the world a better place? Well, luckily you're still serving, right? But you know, I'm sure that there's a lot of great law enforcement officers out there that got out of the profession because of all of the negative experiences, and the world would have been better if they didn't. Right.
And it does make it hard. I mean, when you're out there doing exactly what you're supposed to do, and you are doing it right, you treat people with respect, you do the job the way it's supposed to be done, just like the majority of every other police officer out there does. And you're still getting pressured, and you're still getting that negativity back. You're still thought of as a bad person, no matter how good you are at your job or how well you're trying to do the job, and you're trying to protect and you're trying to serve people and you're trying to do good. No matter how much good I do, everybody only sees the bad. Maybe not the bad in me, but maybe the bad in that the guy did 2 states over.
Yeah,
and he very well may have done something absolutely wrong. It doesn't have anything to do with me. I'm just trying to help you out.
Right.
I'm sorry that there's been bad experiences. I don't want to ever come across that way. I don't want you to ever have that type of situation with me, but you still get the negativity.
So along with that lack of transparency, one of the things that I've kind of picked up on is this whole issue with when there is an incident, there seems to be zero hesitation from the public relations people to come out and immediately say the officer didn't do anything wrong when the video clearly shows they did something wrong, right? Am I wrong about that? As a law enforcement officer, because you see all the same news reports I do, and I don't want to talk about specific situations because that gets people really amped up, but I have seen some police shooting videos where I'm like, there was absolutely no reason for him to fire in this situation. He definitely wasn't at risk. The person was heading away from them. There was one where the guy was drunk and he could barely run. He was like just stumbling, and the guy shoots him in the back and kills him, right? And then 2 seconds later, there's the public relations person. Our officer feared for his life. Feared for his life? From what? The guy couldn't have hurt him if he wanted to. He was so drunk, and he was more than 21 feet away. He didn't have a weapon. He was headed away. Why? You know. So do you, as a law enforcement officer, does that frustrate you? Is there like a culture that's like, hey, it doesn't matter. We're going to support ours no matter what they do?
There is that culture. It's not as much as it was years and years and years ago. I mean, there was a time that thin blue line was one of those, you never turn against your own, you never speak against your own or anything like that. I don't think that's there anymore. Well, and I don't see it.
It's less.
It's less. I don't see it like it used to be.
There should be a fraternity.
In the 80s. Yeah, there should be support.
And there should be, some support.
there should be support for what's right, and and don't support what's wrong. Don't support it just because you're supposed to support. I mean, I don't feel that way myself. I don't.
Right.
If somebody's done something wrong, I may not be out there beating the banner of,
right.
You need to throw him in jail or something like that. But I'm not going to come out and say he was completely right.
Right.
All that good stuff. It's a real thin line to walk as far as the agencies try to be transparent. They want to support their people. So you get that immediate reaction of, he didn't do anything wrong. He was in fear for his life. All that other, a little bit too soon. Maybe you get somebody that's actually stepping in front of the microphone a little bit earlier than they should, trying to be transparent. And then you support your officer. And the next thing you know, you're going through the footage and you're like, oh, he probably did something he shouldn't have done. You kind of start running into that catch-22. Do you wait? And
wait.
Yeah. Yeah. And my personal, you wait. And I think that's the smart thing to do, is wait until all this situation comes out. And then you catch a lot of flack to where you're just not wanting to. You're not wanting to show your hand. You got something to hide. That's why you're not coming out and talk to us. No, I'm not coming out and talk to you right now because I want to have the full facts before I get out there in front of you.
Right. No, I understand that. It's a little bit like I have a terror of the concept of like liberalism, which I know a lot of like very progressive individuals that their theories are well thought out and there's logic behind it. But there's also this fear that I have of, you can vilify somebody who thinks differently to you to garner support from people who think similarly to you, to the point that they no longer seem human. Right. And I think I see that happening politically on the liberal side and the conservative side. But that type of problem has leaked into law enforcement. We had a, psychopath that went on a shooting rampage here in Dallas and killed police officers, regardless of race, right? But the fervor that's out there right now is not based on the reality of the facts, right? And people are not communicating, which is part of the reason why I do this podcast, is that I want people to be able to see the other side. Even if you walk away and you still disagree, I want you to understand they're humans. Their lives matter, right? And even if you have kind of a negative connotation with, when you kill them, their kids grow up without a parent, It's a big deal. And one of the things that really frustrates me is that there isn't enough transparency. There isn't enough communication. I would love to see law enforcement agencies, even if it's federally funded, produce educational videos to teach the public the kinds of questions that I'm asking, like, how do you interact with a law enforcement officer? And why do you interact with a law enforcement officer that way? What training do they receive that tells them to be nervous when you cross your arms, or when you look over your shoulder, or when your hands are in your pockets? Let them see that training video where the police officer was able to draw his gun and he fired it 6 times and he still got murdered, right? If you have that fresh in your mind as a law enforcement officer, you're going to behave in a way that's going to seem erratic to somebody who doesn't know you just saw that training video and is like, why can't I cross my arms, right? I would love to see there kind of be a shift, because it's going beyond, just like, oh, this would be good for society. Like, people are losing their lives.
Absolutely. On both sides.
On both sides. And at this point, society's not going to look real good without law enforcement officers, because all those people that get into an altercation on a weekly basis inside the jails are going to be out on the streets interacting with your family and your kids if there were no law enforcement officers, right? And that's something that you don't want, right? So we need to fix this, and we need to communicate, and we need to try to build bridges. And so, from my perspective, I'm not saying that law enforcement officers are always right.
No, absolutely not.
I'm not saying that
by
at
no
all.
means either.
I've seen lots of videos where the law enforcement officer was clearly in the wrong, and I don't know what motivated him to do that.
And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't see either, is in my career, I have seen law enforcement officers that did wrong, and they are no longer in law enforcement anymore. There was no, okay, you did this, you went overboard, you got to get out.
Right.
We got to do something. We either file charges against you, or just if it was something you couldn't file charges on, you need to terminate them and get them out of here, because that's not the type of person. Agencies are self-policing, and they are taking the steps. You may not see it all the time,
right?
But the steps are there. Agencies do not want their officers out behaving badly.
Sure.
That is not something anybody wants, and they do take the steps to remedy that.
Do you think that that's done so privately? I feel like there's too much emphasis in law enforcement to maintain this like pristine image, like we never make mistakes, and that's also what motivates the lack of transparency, lack of communication. Is it a recruitment thing? Like, well, we won't be able to recruit officers if they know we don't have their back, or what?
Right, and it's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, I think a lot of the transparency part of it is why you don't see stuff like that is the cameras are off. The cameras are there when the bad stuff's going on. The agency takes the steps to correct it, either by getting rid of the officer or filing charges on him or something like that. You don't see that part on the news. You see him doing something he wasn't supposed to do. I think there's a lot of that. As an officer, I would expect my agency to support me when I'm right. I would expect them to discipline me when I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everybody should probably go in with that attitude.
Mm-hmm.
If it affects recruitment, if you're going someplace because they don't have your back, well, maybe they don't have your back because you're doing something you're not supposed to do.
Sure.
So
I guess that cuts both ways. If you're gonna say, like, don't be nervous when you're interacting with law enforcement because you don't get in trouble unless you do something wrong. If you want to be a law enforcement officer, you need to have that same attitude.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Right.
And it's like I tell my people at the office, I'm your supervisor. When you're in the right, I will defend you till we both go down.
Right.
If you're wrong, I'll take you over there myself.
Right.
And we'll face it.
Whatever the consequence is.
Yeah. I will take you across the hall to own up to it myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think that agencies need to have that type of attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they do for the majority of the part of it. I really do. I mean, in my law enforcement career, if I do wrong, I expect to be disciplined for it, and I expect the full punishment. Sometimes even more than what most normal people, citizens,
because you had a high level obligation.
There's a higher expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And when you violate that expectation, a lot of times the consequences for you may be a little bit higher than what it would be for somebody the expectations aren't so high.
Gotcha. So I think that's probably a good place to kind of wrap it up. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you think? Imagine that this is being watched by a whole crowd of Black Lives Matter supporters that have, very negative experiences, negative opinion of law enforcement officers. Is there anything else that you think that they need to know that you think could build a bridge between the two halves?
I think there's a lack of understanding on both sides of the coin. I don't think it's just one side not listening to what the other side has to say. I don't think it's one-sided. I think everybody needs to understand where the other side's coming. When there's that understanding, there's a little bit more. You can, like they call it, the emotional seesaw.
Mm-hmm.
When you get an understanding, and you can bring that emotions down, then rationality goes up, and you can kind of get on a better playing field equally with each other. Not everybody's bad, just like on both sides.
Right.
Not everybody I come in contact with is a criminal, and not every police officer that you come in contact is a bad guy.
Right.
So I truly believe that there are some out there. There are criminals out there. There are police officers out there that are doing stuff they shouldn't do. Not everybody's that way. Not everybody's a criminal. Not every cop's a bad cop.
Yeah, unfortunately, you don't have the knowledge of who's who,
right?
Until
Absolutely.
It's too late, and that's on both sides,
right? Yeah, and that's a fair statement.
So one of the things that I didn't cover, I was talking with one of my my Black friends, and he had explained to me that where he grew up, there was a rival gang, and he told me some stories about individuals that were in a gang that had to support a fellow gang member. Even though they knew the fellow gang member was wrong, because of their obligation to their gang. And he then explained to me that that's what he sees, that same like blind support. That's what he sees when the, you know, public relations person gets on the news and says like, our officer feared for his life and blah, blah, blah. And you can see the video and it's clearly not that. And he said, you know, for people that grew up with that type of environment, they have a social mechanism that they understand to apply to that situation to make it make sense. And to them, law enforcement officers are just a rival gang. However, they are immune from prosecution almost because they're supported by the government, right? And he said that's why a lot of you know, Black Lives Matter supporters entertain the idea of kneeling during the national anthem or you know, what people perceive disrespecting the flag, because that flag doesn't represent law enforcement officers behaving inappropriately in the community. It represents the government, and the government allows them to do that. In fact, it supports them. It perpetuates it, because when someone does wrong, they can almost always escape prosecution because they have that badge. And so it just seems like a rival gang that can behave with impunity. And so that's a framework that's kind of helped me to understand that other side of the coin, because I didn't live that life, right? And hearing somebody say that, it's heartbreaking.
I had never had it explained to me that way until you had said something like that. And I think that's one of those things of the two sides not communicating with each other. That's not that side of how somebody would see us in law enforcement never occurred to me, because I've never had that conversation with somebody else.
There was another thought that I had. I only, I don't know if I've ever said this on the podcast. I only listen to gangster rap music, like almost exclusively. And so in a lot of rap music, there's a, you know, willingness to take another person's life over seemingly insignificant things. Someone steps on your new Jordans, right? You know, if you killed somebody for stepping on your new Jordans in the club, you would end up with a lot of street credibility, right? But I've seen scenarios where, you know, people that subscribe to that mentality see a police shooting that they believe is unjust, and they'll go out on the streets and protest. They would have killed that same person for having stepped on their shoes, but they think the officer's not in the right for having killed the person when they resisted arrest, or because they had a knife, which that was something else that somebody said. They were like, well, why couldn't he have just shot him in the leg? Are police officers allowed to shoot you in the leg?
We are not trained to shoot anybody in the leg.
Right. And what I was trained whenever I got my concealed carry license is that you don't shoot to wound, because in doing so, you are admitting that you're committing a crime because you're using deadly force, and clearly you didn't think it was necessary, right? Is that a fair assessment?
It is. I mean, we're not trained to wound people. We're not trained to kill people. We are trained to stop people.
Right.
And if me shooting somebody stops them and they live through that, that is the way we want it to turn out.
Right.
I'm not. When an officer pulls their gun in defense of themselves, or they feel like they're in a situation to where they have to pull their gun, killing the person's not the going through the objective. That's to stop them to stop them from doing what they're doing.
Gotcha.
They do not train you to shoot in the legs, or anything like that.
And so one of the things that helped me to understand that, because in listening to rap music, and I hear about people talking about, you know, I'm a murderer and I'll kill, blah, blah, blah. But those same people support the Black Lives Matter movement, and it couldn't equate for me in my, you know, white mind, not having ever had those experiences. But once I started seeing it through that prism of, to them, this is a rival gang that can almost always escape prosecution. There's an unfairness there, right? Like there's a street law that dictates, you know, how things are going to play out. And yes, you're willing to kill somebody over something that seems insignificant, but you're also willing to face the punishment that the government brings to you. And you're going to try to escape it, but that also would bring you street cred. If you go to jail for murder and get out, you have street credibility in that, if you subscribe to that mentality. But that same person can be indignant about it because the police officer didn't face that risk, right? And so that's a new framework for me to view things through, and I don't know that it's 100% accurate, but I'm trying to
Right.
understand. And so I hope that over time, that there can be more understanding on both sides, so that law enforcement officers can start to choose to engage in behaviors that don't necessarily put them at risk, but don't aggravate that mentality that's causing things to escalate and cause more problems than there needs to be. And at the same time, I want law enforcement officers like yourself to share with the public what you've been trained, what's okay, how to interact, so that we can reduce the number of incidents.
Right, absolutely. And none of the things that I put across today are by any means completely universal.
Right.
I mean, there's always going to be situations where
there's some other variable
that makes it to where that's not the right thing to do.
Sure.
So, I mean,
I would just say, in general, if you're a law enforcement officer, understand that there's that mentality that you can behave with impunity, that you can escape prosecution, and that when you are seemingly using aggression that's not necessary, to the person that subscribes to that, worldview, it feels to them like oppression, and it feels like that they have no recourse and they can't stop it. But if you are of the impression that law enforcement officers do frequently abuse their power, I would recommend that you try to interact with them in the ways that we described in this video, so that you're not setting off the alarm signals that cause interactions to escalate and potentially become harmful or dangerous. So, anything else you want to add?
No,
Awesome.
I appreciate you having me here.
Absolutely. So, it's not like you have a blog or anything like that to promote. So I'll just do my stuff. So if you would like more information about Bourbon Real Talk, you can get that at bourbonrealtalk.com. You can get it on Facebook /Bourbon Real Talk, Instagram /Bourbon Real Talk. On the website, there is an opportunity for you to fill out an online web form. If you think that you would be a show guest, and if you were intrigued by this, if you are a supporter of Black Lives Matter and you would like to be a guest on the show, if you're also a law enforcement officer who through some miracle is able to communicate with me without violating your social media obligations, I'd love to hear from you. I want to continue to discuss this topic because I think it's something that's definitely affecting the United States today, and anything that I can do to make it better, I'd like to. And if you come on my show, we're going to be drinking some good whiskey. So there's always that. But as always, if you have any doubt, just know that I love you and that there is always a brighter day and there's hope. And I will see you next time on Bourbon Real Talk.